morning. My name is Bobby Zirkin. I am a former state senator from Baltimore County, and I am proud to be here on behalf of the Maryland State Bar Association for our continuing interviews with all of the gubernatorial and lieutenant governor candidates. Today we're interviewing candidates for governor and lieutenant governor here at the beautiful University of Maryland, Baltimore County. As we approach the July primary election, the State Bar remains committed to our members and to the public at large to connect in a nonpartisan forum on issues that matter both to the public and to our membership. MSBA has appreciated the positive relationship we've always had with the executive branch of government, and we hope to continue that incredible relationship in years to come. Please visit our website at msba.org/connect with the candidates to view all of our candidate conversations. And I am proud to be here today with Candace Hollingworth, who is the lieutenant governor candidate for Doug Gansler, former attorney general. And Ms. Hollingworth, or Candace if I could, thank you for being here, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, and yes, I prefer Candace.
All right. So, for those who may not know you, who haven't met you yet, if you could just kind of give an introduction as to who you are and why you're running and how you came to be the lieutenant governor candidate for the state.
Sure. So who am I? That should be an easy question for anybody to answer. But I find that I'm still discovering myself, and it's always a beautiful journey along that route. But I'm Candace Hollingworth, originally from Memphis, Tennessee. Doug hates when I say that. He's like, it's Maryland. Yes, it's Maryland. But I say that because being a woman born and raised in the South is really important into the way that I view relationships, how I view community building, how I view the work that is so important in front of us. I am a mom to two beautiful children. My son is 17. He's a senior at Eleanor Roosevelt High School. My daughter is 13. She is a rising 8th grader at Hyattsville Middle School in the Creative and Performing Arts program. We live in Hyattsville, where I had the pleasure of serving as their mayor for nearly 6 years, but was in government for a total of 10 almost. I served as council member for 4 years before that. Public service has always been a part of my life, although I didn't necessarily recognize it that way. For high school, I went to boarding school in New Hampshire, and our motto is non-sibi, which means not for oneself. And it was there that I learned the true value of community, what it means and what it can really, the value that it brings to our experiences and our responsibilities to this world. And having had that experience, then going to undergrad at Emory in Atlanta, where it was drastically different. Community wasn't necessarily top of everyone's mind. Emory University was known as, a campus that was incredibly diverse, but also incredibly segregated in terms of how the ways that we experience campus life. And so community wasn't innate in our experiences. And I sought out to build the same community that I'd come to appreciate and love at my high school. And in doing that, got involved in a lot of campus organizations and leadership, that kind of thing. And that thread has run through my entire career. When I moved to Hyattsville in December of 2009, I decided to get involved because this was home. My first way of getting involved was by joining the PTA and of my son's school at the time. He was going to be in kindergarten. And in watching the local council meetings, I said, okay, there's not many people that's talking about the things that are important to me, like young people, their experiences, education, the ways that, cities can influence education, the ways that we build community with each other. And I said, well, you know what? The worst thing can happen is I run. The worst thing is to happen, I lose. I didn't lose. And I ran because I wanted to help build a community and create the community that I knew that my kids would want to return to. I don't live in Memphis, not because I don't like home. I don't live in Memphis because my hometown, unfortunately, did not do the necessary work of making sure that people who left to take their talents to college or other experiences came back. And I wanted Hyattsville to be that place where, my kids would say, I want to go back there. I want to contribute to my home. And I think as lieutenant governor, it's an opportunity for us to take that same type of mindset in that we are building a city that is not just, a great place to live for some people, it's a great place to live for everyone. And that as much as we are nurturing the next generation of leaders in world-class education systems, that they choose to come back and that they choose to stay. And at its core, I think our job as governor and lieutenant governor is to set a vision for Maryland that creates a place where people are like, I'm proud to be a Marylander.
Okay.
Whether it's by choice or by birth.
All right. Well, let's get into some of the specifics of what a Gansler Hollingsworth administration would look like. So I've asked this of all the, give your top three. It's always, for some reason, people say three, but if you want to give two or four, whatever you want to do, your top, kind of the top specific agenda items that you and Attorney General Gansler would want to bring as governor and lieutenant governor. Yeah,
so the main one is, and it's the top job of any government officials, to keep folks safe. Doug and I have, I think, a unique approach to safety that we haven't seen any other jurisdiction or state across this country to get right. And we have an opportunity as Democratic leaders to really lead in this way, where we have, not just an idea of how to address public safety, but also the experience and the skills to do it. Doug, through the criminal justice system, addressing crime when it happens, making sure that we have laws that are enforced appropriately and that people are held accountable. But also my experience as a former mayor, recognizing that, safety starts at home and it starts with making sure that communities have the resources that they need for folks to thrive. The second is that we actually recognize the fact that we are, Doug and I will be we'll be coastal governor and lieutenant governor. Maryland is a place we talk about climate change. We're talking about the reality being that it is already here. We're not preventing something that is going to happen in the future. We're already in that moment. And we have to build and lead to make sure that our cities and towns are resilient to that fact. But lastly, it's about financial sustainability. Right now, we're in a moment where, jurisdictions are flush with capital because of funding that came through the Biden administration and COVID relief. And we have really big priorities that cost a lot. And in order for us to make sure that government can continue to be the safety net that it is for many people and many Marylanders, we have to make sure that we understand the depth of the resources that we have available to us so that we know how to tax appropriately and we know how to give relief appropriately. And we can meet those objectives without being a further burden on Marylanders who are experiencing the pain of inflation right now.
Okay. A lot to unwind. Let's start with public safety. I know it's something that General Gansler has been talking quite a bit about on the campaign trail. So let's kind of drill down into some specifics. So what is it, let me just give you a rash of issues and you can pick and choose.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've seen a horrendous increase in gun violence, whether it's mass shootings at schools, this is across the country, or even in Prince George's or Baltimore City or in Baltimore County where I'm from, like an increase in gun crimes and murder rate is stubbornly high, certainly in Baltimore City. What do we do about all these things? The governor had an approach, the legislature's had an approach, the mayor has his approach. It just, nothing seems to be kind of clicking. So what does a Gansler Hollingsworth administration do to tackle this issue?
The thing that doesn't click, in my opinion, is that each single person thinks they have the single right solution. And the reality is that we have the obligation to create the society that we want, that we envision, which is one where we don't rely, solely on law enforcement, where we don't rely on policing and arrests in order to create a safe community. But at the same time, we have a moral and we have an obligation as civic leaders to address the problem that is right in front of us. The problem right in front of us is that people are dying, that guns are too easily accessible, that they are in the hands of folks many of whom are desperate. And they become ways for folks to figure out how to survive on their own. And our job is to thread the needle between those two things. And I think Doug and I have an approach that we don't necessarily see in a combined leadership slate. And that is where you have someone who's saying, no, laws are important and enforcing laws are important while they're there. But it's also, we don't have to do that while sacrificing justice. And so recognizing that crime disproportionately impacts communities of color, that usually is the result of the fact that those communities lack opportunities, that there are decades of disinvestment, and that we also have increased availability of guns and not enough resources to address drug use and not enough resources for people to get and find jobs.
Okay, so the solutions are?
I'm sorry.
Give me like the 1, 2, 3 of
the solution
of what it is that you guys
investing.
want to propose.
It's investing in law enforcement, making sure that our local agencies have what they need and they can recruit the officers that they need, but also having a deep investment in community resources, things like jobs, housing, transportation, and building a strong local economy.
Anything on the criminal law front? I know that General Gansler had made some news when he talked down actually at the MSBA about an approach of reinstating essentially some mandatory minimums for repeat violent offenders. Thoughts on that?
There's one that he speaks about frequently, and that's around gun violence, because we recognize that gun violence is one of the leading causes of violence that we experience in Maryland. And what he's talking about specifically is having a minimum on repeat offenders of gun crimes. Okay. And so I think it's important that we make that distinction, particularly in a time when people recognize that black people in particular are often incarcerated at higher rates, arrested at higher rates, and profiled and targeted at higher rates.
Okay. Let me just ask you a specific question I've asked most of the candidates, and that's a school resource officer program. Mm-hmm. It's been in the news, obviously, with what happened, which was a failing in Texas. Mm-hmm. One legislator has continued to push to get rid of the program. Some say just let each local jurisdiction do it. I was curious how they actually do it in Prince George's County, how they did it in your town, in Hyattsville, like how school resource officers operate in Baltimore County. I only know from the time in the legislature, it's a nationally awarded and acclaimed program where the mm-hmm. officers actually act as teachers and coaches and so forth, not just as a security guard. Thoughts on that from mm-hmm. the Gansler Hollingworth, and also how is it done in Prince George's County?
So to answer your initial question, which is how it's done in Prince George's County, Prince George's County used to run in partnership with its municipalities a SRO program that they funded. So those municipalities that had law enforcement agencies would receive, kind of a reimbursement from the county to cover the cost of those resource officers. And then I want to say it was in 2016 or thereabout, they reduced their commitment to that program. But in Hyattsville, we saw that it was actually necessary for our students at the local high schools. In particular, because we have a significant population of students that are English language learners and children of undocumented residents, where this is their only opportunity to reintegrate and reunify with their families, but at the same time an increased rate of gang violence that is often targeted to immigrant communities. And so those resource officers were their first, the first person that they went to where they felt safe, if they felt like they were victims of trafficking, if they felt like they were victims or being targeted for gang violence or recruitment. And so that allowed us to actually reduce the presence and footprint in the city of Hyattsville. So we continue to fund that program, but at this point, that program, and it still exists, we now have Compassion and Comfort Dog that's a part of that program, where they are the dog and the officer are the first folks that the students see, and they come through and they pet the dog, and it allows for increasing the morale of students in the building. They are not involved in the regular disciplinary actions of the school. It's really in addressing violent incidents or potentially violent incidences that happen on campus. Gansler Hollingworth administration supports the use of school resource officers in schools that need them. I think it's important that we recognize there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to public safety or even the various strategies that are used there. And this is an opportunity for not just jurisdictions to recognize what they need, but it's also an opportunity for the client or the customer, which is a student. There are schools where students don't feel safe. And if they feel that school resource officers are the thing that's allowing them to feel safer, I think it's our obligation to make sure we meet that.
Does it surprise you? This question I haven't asked. It always struck me that was the epitome of a program that was community policing, that mm-hmm. there were relationships were being built, positive relationships mm-hmm. were being built. Does it surprise you that there are legislators who are trying to simply do a one-size-fits-all and simply say you can't have them there, considering all these I mean, in addition to all other things, these mass shootings at schools?
No, it doesn't surprise me because every officer is not a school resource officer. And every school that has an officer in their school is not a trained school resource officer. And a lot of times when we have those incidents where students are inappropriately targeted, where there's physical violence and abuse at the hands of a law enforcement agent at a school, many times those folks are not actually trained school resource officers. And it's important that we make the distinction between a program that actually makes sure that people are certified, that they understand how to de-escalate, actually use various tactics to ensure that we're diverting young people away from criminal justice system and actually resolving issues on the campus and in the school. And those programs where people, or not programs, but those situations where principals just call the police, especially in an environment when we know that police training needs to improve. And so we increase the vulnerabilities of young people when we do that. And so I'm not surprised by it, but I think it's our opportunity, our obligation to educate, inform, and to increase the resources that are available for officers to become school resource officers so that you increase the opportunities for students to engage with, that if they are engaging with law enforcement, that they're engaging with law enforcement who are properly trained and skilled to handle their unique needs.
Okay. I'm going to try to shoot through all these.
I'm sorry.
No,
taking too long
not
for
at all.
You.
No. We're here to talk about specific issues. So one that may be a little bit too fresh to have had any thought about. I've asked the question and has gotten a lot of moving around on it in the last couple of days. I guess so. The Supreme Court has had quite a week last week. Before we get to the Roe v. Wade question, one of the areas that kind of the decision right before Roe v. Wade had dramatic effect for Maryland, and that was the New York law, which it's a little bit more complicated than that, but essentially, as you know, did away with our permitting process for the carry permits, for the right, essentially made us a right to carry state until the General Assembly acts, and I'm not sure what they could do within the confines. Any thoughts about where we go from there? Because it appears that our law, which is pretty complex, was just thrown out by the Supreme Court, and now individuals will be allowed to carry on the streets. Thoughts about what, if anything, the state can or should do on that issue, which just came about?
Yeah, so this is one of those areas, and I'm not a trained attorney, so I don't want to presume to understand that.
Yep.
But this is one of those issues like women's reproductive freedom, where it is incredibly important that the governor and that the governor's office, lieutenant governor, and the attorney general work together to recognize the ways that the state can best represent its citizens. Citizens of Maryland want to feel safe. Part of that has been the fact that we have laws that enable or limit and restrict the use and presence of guns in public space. And I think that it's important for the Attorney General to represent that fact and do as much as they can to appeal or at least reinforce and try to support the laws that the General Assembly may come up with in order to continue to keep residents safe. And I think that's where it's really valuable that we have a candidate like Doug Gansler, who has been an Attorney General, but also is a practicing attorney, recognizing the areas of the law that we can change and finding ways that we can use the laws that do exist and continue to exist to make sure that we undercut or at least try to deal with the ramifications of a relaxed law like the one in New York.
Okay. Next one, and I think this probably hits, I'm kind of going down the list, the Hyattsville as well as the state of Maryland. Baltimore County is prepared to announce, or at least the police department is about to announce that they thought it was going to be about 230, 240 police officers shy of what they need, but it looks like it could be as many as 300 vacancies within the police department. And they're seeing that all over the state and actually all over the country, but it is really acute in places like Baltimore City, Baltimore County, perhaps Prince George's. And Montgomery had a class that they were looking for recruits, and they ended up with a fraction of what they needed. So I guess I throw this out there. It's a big problem. It's a crisis, and it's right on our doorstep. In fact, it's at our doorstep. And so I guess the question is, if you had an opportunity to say on day one, we've got to address this by doing X, Y, or Z, I mean, what is the solution to the fact that people just are not becoming police officers anymore?
Yeah, and there are a number of reasons that are influencing that decision. As speaking from my experience as a former mayor, one of the primary drivers, unfortunately, is the fact that we live in an area with a significant number of agencies that people can apply to. You have federal agencies, you got state agencies, local agencies, and all offer varying degrees of compensation, which also includes, the additional benefits, whether it's a take-home car or all those other pieces. And I think the area where state government can have the biggest influence, and I think folks are going to, they're not going to like this answer, but where state has the biggest influence is in supporting local jurisdictions, local law enforcement agencies, in their recruiting efforts by offering, the financial support that they need to be able to increase the wages there. But when we're increasing and making using compensation as a way to make policing more attractive to those that might be interested in it, we also have to have a priority on recruiting locally, recruiting people who live in the communities or were born in the communities that they're seeking to serve, and that we are making sure that we're investing in continuing education for those officers, and that we don't assume that just because we're having a challenge recruiting, that we pass the buck on accountability. Because all of those pieces go together, not just in making sure that the communities they police feel safer with them, but it also allows for officers to be able to do the job that they envisioned to do when they got into law enforcement to begin with. I think everyone wants to be able to do their best job and to be served better. And part of that is making sure that the profession has what it needs and that communities have what they need.
Do you think that the state should be involved in increasing the salaries at the local level, or do you think, there are different approaches that have been, Senator Smith, Will Smith from Montgomery County had put in a bill last year and I think has at least announced that he's intending to do something like what they did for nurses, which is when there was a nursing shortage, which is to give essentially scholarships to their kids, to dependents, what have you, for college, or to them if they want to go back and get a bachelor's or master's or whatever to the officer. In addition to something like that, are there other creative ways, or do you think the state should start thinking about being kind of a bigger partner in terms of salaries of police officers?
I do think the state has to think about being a bigger partner. Just thinking from a municipal perspective, if we're trying to address, if we identify that compensation is the thing that we want to influence, because that number goes up significantly year over year. Not only are you dealing with, any step increases or cost of living adjustments, you're also dealing with the fact that overtime may be calculated based on these new rates. And local agencies, local, budgets, cities and towns really can't support those increases at those levels, whether it's in terms of manpower or also at numbers. And so we have to be a better partner in that regard. We also have to look at those creative approaches like, helping support continuing education or at least degrees. But it's another thing that influences it is the cost of living. The cost of living in the state of Maryland is increasing by the day, by the year. And it's even more difficult for officers to be able to live where they work because of the cost of living, especially when you're talking about larger areas like Baltimore City, Anne Arundel County, even in Hyattsville. And so we have to recognize the impact that our decisions around all of the other quality of life issues, the impact that those have on the state of policing and being able to create the type of community-oriented policing that we desire.
Okay. You mentioned, I'm going to try to get through them, we touched on the Roe v. Wade decision, which has sent shockwaves through the country. Maryland law is settled on it. Thoughts about things that Maryland should or could be doing? Should we put it in, I guess the big debate right now is, should we have a constitutional amendment enshrining pro-choice into the Constitution? What are your thoughts on that, or are we where we need to be?
I think that we need to determine changes to Constitution based on the severity of the problems that we have in front of us. I do think that charters and constitutions are kind of established for a purpose, but we also have to protect ourselves from the vulnerabilities of bad leadership. And in this case, we've seen a very clear vulnerability in bad leadership. And I do support having that as a right for Maryland women or people in Maryland in the state's constitution. But I also think that we have to go much further. It's not just about protecting a woman's right to choose and having access to abortion. It's the fact that we don't have enough reproductive health care supports in the state of Maryland to begin with. If we only take Planned Parenthood as an example, and they're not the only providers, there are only 7, I believe, centers across the state of Maryland. And when you think about community-based or at least nonprofit-based health care and settings that are a bit more amenable to women or those who may not have the resources and may not be insured, those types of resources need to increase. And so that's where it's important that even though, Maryland's law is settled, we've seen with Hogan that the funding necessary to support expanding the availability of care for women, particularly for abortion care, is vulnerable. And it's been vulnerable to someone who's made the decision that they don't want to release those funds. So that's why it's important that we have Democratic leadership, but we also have Democratic leadership that understands the very unique needs of women and the ways that we don't serve women in the best way possible now.
Okay. So constitutional amendment or no constitutional amendment?
I would, for this purpose, yes.
For this purpose?
Yes.
All right, let's quickly talk about the other constitutional amendment. Apparently our Constitution is a hot topic these days. There is not in the primary, which is what you're running in right now, but in the next election, the general election, we've got a constitutional amendment on marijuana legalization. I was, just to be fair, I was the lead sponsor of the decriminalization legislation that passed, where it became a civil offense versus a criminal. I was interested yesterday on CNN.com, for all things. There was a big article from a health journal that there's been a huge increase in the number of individuals who have ended up with some psychosis because of the strength of marijuana, and it's leading to some health issues that maybe weren't around when I was younger. And so I guess the question is, what do you think about all this? And then assuming that the referendum passes, what do we need to do to put in place some protections to make sure that perhaps those types of issues don't creep into Maryland?
Yeah, I think that's one of the benefits of having an industry that is regulated, is that you're actually able to study and examine the public health effects and implications and have, laws put in place to address those. When you don't have anything regulated, you can have high levels and dosages of THC. You have people that are looking at not really studying the effects of cannabinoids on mental health or even on physical health and ability to go about their daily lives. So I think that's where, honestly, I think those are areas where we actually create a benefit to the public by having a regulated industry in that way. And so in addition to that, we also have to look at taxation. I know this isn't, related to the public health part of it, but it's part of why I say financial sustainability is a key issue going forward, because if we don't know or understand, what resources we have at our disposal, how do we determine a tax rate that's appropriate? Right. And then how do we determine, taxation that allows us to buffer for those unintended consequences that we expect or anticipate, whether they're related to public health, whether they're related to public safety, or if they're just, and also with regard to employment.
You're a yes on the legalization referendum?
Sorry, I'm a nerd, so I can end up talking for days about things.
No, not at all.
So, yes, I support that and actually think that, to the degree that the governor has the executive power to be able to legalize marijuana, I think that's something that we should do.
All right. And you spoke about, and I know General Gansler has spoken quite a bit about climate change and other environmental issues. We don't have a ton of time left, but
sorry.
No, not at all. It's good to go through these very substantive issues. Thoughts on what a Gansler Hollingworth administration would do on the issue of climate change, environmental protection?
There is not enough time to talk about what a Gansler Hollingworth administration would do.
All right. I'm joking.
Doug is the climate governor. I'm going to say that about him. Our Green Maryland plan online details a variety of things that we would do with regard to, creating renewable energy, or at least being a key player in creating renewable energy and making sure that we increase our reliance on that as opposed to other fuels. Also how we work with state and local, not state, but local and county governments to create the policies and resources that are needed so that they can adopt stronger environmental policies, that when they're looking at how they grow, that they actually grow with our environment in mind and how we're actually going to be a sustainable state.
Any specific things you'd like to do? For example, there's been talk about fleets of cars becoming electric, or I assume
yes, and
Doug has
investing in light rail, investing in developing of wind energy. Doug often talks about converting poultry waste to renewable energy. Seriously, ganslerformaryland.com and look at Green Maryland Plan. It is very ambitious, far more ambitious than any of the other candidates that I've put out so far.
Transportation issues, are you in favor of restarting? Would your administration be in favor of restarting the Red Line?
Absolutely.
Okay, and Purple Line and all the other colors?
Yes.
Of the rainbow? The Red Line, one of the issues with that was that there was just an exorbitant cost to it, and the cost-benefit analysis, people looked at it in different ways. Why is that something that the state should spend what looked like at least $1 billion or $2 billion on, when maybe there are other projects that might be more worthy? I recall, I wasn't on the budget committee, but recall there was a pretty fierce debate about whether the juice was worth the squeeze on that particular line.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where we have to think about the future benefit of the investments that we make. And investing in light rail, whether we call it the Red Line, whether it's exactly envisioned the same way the previous plans were or not, the fact of the matter is people in Baltimore and people across the state need to be better connected. And if we're serious about increasing the life outcomes for people in Baltimore, both literally and also in their ability to access jobs and employment and simply enjoy leisure, we have to invest in transportation. Those types of investments pay off in the long run because people are participating in the economy. They are actually employed and contributing to tax base. And it also creates opportunities for businesses that may not have otherwise decided to locate in an area to locate there and contribute to the growth of that local economy as well. We cannot undercut Baltimore City. It is folks say one of the crowns one of the jewels in Maryland's crown, and it's been neglected for far too long, and that's one of the areas that we actually have to invest in.
Okay. I've been getting the high sign in the background for a while that we have run out of time. This went by very quickly. We've touched on a bunch of different very specific issues, and I want to thank you, first of all, before I wrap up, I want to thank you so much for spending this half hour with us talking about public safety and reproductive rights and all kinds of issues. So let me just wrap up by telling once again that I want to thank you for tuning in to yet another interview with a Lieutenant Governor candidate, Candace Hollingworth of the Gansler Hollingworth ticket. If you're interested in seeing this or any of the other interviews, please go to msba.org/connect with the candidates. And once again, Mayor, former councilman, thank you so much for spending some time with the Maryland State Bar Association today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right.